colleagues do on this panel, it's Donald Trump, baby.
Yep.
It's all about Donald Trump, right? The old pivot. We're not going to talk about what's going on in Somalia and not going to talk about what's going on in Minnesota with this massive fraud scandal. We're going to talk about Donald Trump. With my remaining seconds, can we play the video I have, Mr. Chairman?
The second Republicans brought up fraud, the left tried to scream racism instead of answering the questions. But then Eli Crane did something that changed the whole room. He rolled the tape, and suddenly the excuses started falling apart fast. Watch this.
Comes after weeks of viral videos from a young man YouTuber who was literally creeping around daycares by himself, making claims about fraud that were not there. And then the vice president and the FBI director were retweeting these videos without even verifying if they were true. So we're not accusing people of being xenophobic and racist. They are being xenophobic and racist, including the President of the United States. And I want to say, for one, that I stand with the Somali and the immigrant community standing here today.
Mr. Hudson, are you just hearing from Republicans on this, or are Democrat constituents like, oh my God, I'm struggling to put my kids in school, struggling to make ends meet, and my tax dollars are being robbed by people, and then they're sending it all over the place, and this is complete fraud. What is going on, and why hasn't anything been done about it?
I'll give you a personal example. So my family, my in-laws in particular, are politically diverse. A lot of them vote for Democrats, and they're fairly apolitical. They're not like me, all plugged in. And so I kind of use them as a bellwether for what the people are thinking. Across the board, everybody is upset about this fraud.
And I'm guessing when you guys bring this up, whether it's to the Waltz administration, whether it's to the AG, the number one thing that comes back at you is you're a racist, you're a white supremacist, or you're an Islamophobe. As we've seen Governor Waltz now trying to answer for these questions, he's doing it at the national level. Do you guys hear the same thing at the state level as well?
Yes, absolutely. They always pivot to the divisive. As I stated in my opening statement, it's diversion, right? We're going to talk about personalities. We're going to talk about partisan politics. We're going to find some way to get people yelling at each other rather than looking at the problem.
Or, like you've heard my colleagues do on this panel, it's Donald Trump, baby.
Yep.
It's all about Donald Trump, right? The old pivot. We're not going to talk about what's going on in Somalia and not going to talk about what's going on in Minnesota with this massive fraud scandal. We're going to talk about Donald Trump. With my remaining seconds, can we play the video I have, Mr. Chairman?
horta aad iyo aadaan ugu faraxsanahay in maanta safaari aan soo gaarnay sida dadka badan ay u og yihiin ciyaalkeena yaryar ilaa iyo number la eg 20 milyan oo ciyaal iskuuley ah waxay cuntadooda ka helaan iskoolka kaliya marka waxaan fursad u helnay in aan sharci soo gudbino oo la dhahayo Meals Act oo u fududeynayo in waqtigaanay pandemic aan ku jirno oo dhalinyarada iskoolka aynan joogin oo guryahooda ay joogaan aynan gaajoonin oo familkoodi wili ay fursad u helaan in cunto ay helaan oo meelo qaarkood laga qaybinayo ay cuntada ka soo qaadan karaan marka aadaan ugu mahadcelinayaa safari in ay tahay meelaha sayti oo diyaarinayo cunto maalin kasto dhalinyarada ciyaalkii iyo familkoodina ku taakuleynaayo cuntada sayti maalintii kaliya safari waxay ay cunto siisaa 2300 oo ciyaal ah iyo familkooda taas waa mid muhiim ah sida aad u ogtihiin dhalinyaro badan gaajo ku nool wadankaanayti ama familkooda fursad u helin in quraac qada iyo casho ay siiso marka in qadadaasaytii ay meel ka helaan aaday u muhiimsan tahay bishaan ramadaanka oo familiyaalkeena badan iyagoo aan shaqo haysanin iyagoo aan taakulayn kaleeta helaynin in aynan ka walwalin ciyaalkooda yaryar sidii ay qada ku siin lahaayeen waa muhiim marka waxaan u mahadcelinayaa safariyo kaleeta iyo dadka badan oo maalin ilaahay keeno fursad u qaata in ay u volunteer gareeyaan oo ay taakuleeyaan familiyaalka.
One thing that is so alarming is the reporting that many of these fraudulent companies are then donating the stolen money back to the same Democrats that are protecting them and advocate for these very programs. Is that correct, Mr. Hudson?
I would agree with that statement.
Well, we just had one of my Democrat colleagues said these are just opinions. You know, are these guys donating money back to Democrats?
Yes, they are.
I'd like to enter into the record, Mr. Chairman, an article from Breitbart News saying, with the title being Database Searches Show Somali Fraudsters Funding Democrat Politicians. So these aren't opinions.
Without objection,
There's actually reporting on this. Are you guys aware? You guys are elected officials in Minnesota, right? Are you guys aware of the reporting that some of the stolen money is getting funneled back to the Islamic terror group Al-Shabaab in Somalia? Mr. Robbins.
Yes, sir. And we have evidence of it going back as far as 2012, where a man was convicted of sending $21,000 to Al-Shabaab. In 2011, 2 Minnesota women were convicted of sending money to different groups.
If there's one thing Democrats absolutely cannot handle right now, it's Americans asking where their tax dollars are going. That's what made this exchange so revealing. Congressman Eli Crane wasn't just debating policy here. He was exposing a pattern that millions of Americans are getting sick and tired of watching. Every single time fraud, corruption, or government abuse gets brought up, the response from the left is almost automatic. They pivot, they deflect, they scream racism, they scream xenophobia, and then they try to shut the conversation down before anybody starts asking real questions. That's exactly what happened here. The hearing was supposed to focus on massive fraud allegations tied to Minnesota programs and concerns about taxpayer money disappearing, while working Americans struggle to pay bills, buy groceries, and keep their kids in school. But instead of directly addressing those concerns, the conversation immediately got dragged back to Donald Trump. Because for a lot of Democrats, that's the escape hatch for everything. Eli Crane called it out perfectly when he said, "It's Donald Trump, baby." That line landed because everybody watching knows it's true. Americans are watching inflation crush families, watching scandals pile up, watching government programs hemorrhage money, and instead of answers, they get lectures about racism and Trump. And then came the moment that really mattered. Crane played the clip involving Ilhan Omar, and suddenly the hearing became bigger than just one argument. Because what Republicans are trying to show is that this isn't only about isolated fraud cases. It's about a political culture where criticism of failed policies instantly gets labeled as hate speech so nobody has to answer tough questions. That's the strategy. Silence the criticism. Intimidate people into backing down. Make the debate toxic enough that normal Americans stop asking questions altogether. But here's the problem for Democrats. Regular people are not buying it anymore. One of the most important parts of this hearing was when the witness explained that even politically moderate or Democrat voting family members were furious about the fraud allegations. That matters because Democrats keep pretending concerns about government corruption only come from conservatives. That's simply not true anymore. Americans of every background are asking the same thing. Where's the money going? People work hard, pay taxes, struggle to survive in this economy, and then hear about millions supposedly disappearing into fraudulent programs while politicians argue over identity politics on television. Of course, people are angry, and the left's response keeps making things worse. Instead of transparency, they accuse critics of being Islamophobic. Instead of investigations, they attack motives. Instead of accountability, they try to make the conversation about emotions and race. Eli Crane and other Republicans are leaning directly into that frustration because they know voters are exhausted with the constant diversions. What also stood out was the allegation that some of these individuals tied to fraudulent activity were donating money back to Democrat politicians. That is politically explosive because if voters start believing taxpayer money is being stolen and then recycled back into political networks, the trust collapse becomes massive. That's why Crane brought up the Breitbart reporting and entered it into the record. He wanted to make it clear this wasn't just random speculation during a heated hearing. He wanted viewers to see there are actual reports and investigations being discussed around these connections. Now Democrats will say Republicans are exploiting this issue politically. Of course they will, but that defense only works if people believe the underlying fraud concerns are fake. And increasingly, Americans do not believe that. What made this hearing powerful for conservatives is that it tapped directly into a bigger national feeling. A lot of Americans think there are two systems in this country now. One for ordinary citizens who get crushed by rules, taxes, and inflation, and another for politically connected groups that seem protected no matter what happens. That resentment is growing fast. And politically, this is dangerous territory for Democrats heading into future elections because voters care about competence. They care about whether government works. If Republicans can successfully frame Democrats as protecting corruption while silencing criticism with accusations of racism, that becomes a devastating message. The left keeps assuming voters will ignore economic pain and government failures as long as Trump's name gets mentioned enough times. But hearings like this show that strategy is wearing thin. Eli Crane understood exactly what he was doing here. He wasn't trying to win approval from the media. He was speaking directly to Americans who feel ignored, dismissed, and insulted every time they question where their money is going. And honestly, the more Democrats refuse to answer those questions directly, the more voters are going to assume Republicans are onto something. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Americans are finally getting tired of the constant deflections and excuses? Let me know below.